Vital is a new synthesizer from Matt Teitel, who brought us such great open source hits as Helm and N-Curse's Synth. N-Curse's Synth actually works in a terminal and has a really simple interface that works in that restriction. This is a decidedly more sophisticated synthesizer than that, with several wavetables. There's lots of LFOs and modulation, and of course MPE or MIDI Polyphonic Expression capabilities. I'll be showing you how to design a preset in Vital, and that way it gives you a good overview of all the different corners and how to use the synthesizer. There's not really a manual for this yet, though there's one sort of in the works in the community. There's a really strong community though, and lots of good tutorials, and hopefully this one joins that crowd. I want to give a shout out to Cubic, who's done a lot of really great tutorials that explain the basics of this stuff, and that's how I got started working with it. And now I'm on my way to developing presets. So let's take a look at what I've got here so far. This is kind of like an ambient type patch, but has a lot of really great high-end things you can bring in and out with the MPE, and then has some macros that we can use to sort of give a different dimension to the sound as well. So let's take a listen, and then we'll take a look at how we can build this up. So you can see by using the macros, I've been able to really kind of find different corners of expression with this one simple preset. And from that, of course, we want to drill down to all of the details. So let's take a look first at how we create a wavetable and how we can bring that into Vital. In order to create a wavetable, I knew I wanted to start with something kind of more organic sounding. Most wavetables tend to be synthetic in their origins and then morph through some sort of process. I thought I would try something that would just give me a result and see what happened. So in that theme, I decided to start with something that's quite polar opposite of what I was going to get out of Vital, which tends to be very digital synthetic things. I started with a French horn physical model. I just did a quick recording of playing one note. And then from there, we can take a look at that sample. And that really just kind of gives us the simple wavetable that we'll use. In my Finder, Vital has its own presets folder. And in the case of the Mac, this is on Music and Vital. This is going to be in User Documents on Windows. I created a Sensel folder here and created samples and a wavetables folder. And the samples, I just created sort of a crop of that French horn because I wanted to use that in the sampler of Vital. So this is really kind of taking the most basic table and then building a bigger preset out of it. Here in my wavetables, I have the French horn. So in Vital, I can go to Initialize preset. And now I'm just starting with the most basic sound here. We've got our basic envelope, which is automatically applied to the oscillator. Then we've got the wavetable here. And we can take a look by clicking this area. We can change our view. A popular thing to do is, and this is how you apply modulation. So let's take a look at that. Just set up a basic ramp in the LFO. And then you apply that to the wavetable position. And now when I play it, it will scan through at the rate of that LFO. How do we get our wavetable that we made in here? We click on the name, and then we can select from all of the different wavetables that are available. So these are the factory ones that just come with it. Here I can find my French horn wavetable. And now I can play that. And now it's actually almost sounds like a string instrument rather than a horn. that is our wavetable. Let's move on to actually creating the preset and all of the great strategies we can use to blow that buzzy little sound out into something really wonderful. Now that I have the wavetable loaded into the initial preset, we can start designing. The first thing I wanted to do is give it a little bit richer tone by dropping the pitch a little bit. It comes in pretty high. I don't know all of the rules for how it adopts a standard wave file into a wavetable. I just kind of took what I had and decided to work with it. There are editors out there that let you make wavetables that will give you a very specific chopping of a particular sound and make it a wavetable that is suitable for this. Because I'm just using some old wave file that has some changes over time, I get what I get. So that's a little bit more in accordance with what I want. And it might even be a good idea to tune it to the particular notes here. This is a C, something to consider at a later time. What I want to do now is to start adding some motion to the wavetable here. And I'm going to do that with a couple LFOs. The first one I'm going to do is just going to scan through. So what we do to add modulations is we select one of the rectangles here, and this is the modulation add point, and then we just patch it over to whatever parameter. And the cool thing is as you add these LFOs to whatever you're doing, you can actually hear the changes on a sort of preview basis. So before you apply it, you can actually hear what the changes are going to sound like. So now I'm scanning through the wavetable, and an interesting sound perhaps for a 1960s sci-fi movie. But let's try something a little bit more interesting. I can actually apply a second LFO to have it warble and sort of saw through some of the area of this that's interesting. And what I'm going to need to do is change this first one so it's not oscillating. That is a mistake I made. So I'll change that to envelope, and now it's just going to run through this once when I hit a note. And now the second LFO takes over. And as far as how much it's going to modulate and what area, you can do that, adjust these points here. And that's kind of a nice sort of seesawing sound to that oscillator. I can furthermore add a little bit of delay to this so it doesn't come in quite so soon. And all of these things are happening to the tempo, so whatever tempo you're happening to working at, everything's just going to kind of fall in nicely. So now what I want to do is add a second oscillator, and I'm going to use the same wavetable, but I'm just going to use it in a little bit different way. So I'll go ahead and enable that with the enable buttons. So now I can again go to my folder that I added and select my French horn wavetable, and I like the 3D view. And again, I'm going to do something similar, but this is going to actually sort of oscillate in a different region at a different width. So that will actually give us some nice contrast, even though we're using the same sound. And then I'm also going to pitch this one way down, so it gives me a really like meaty bass sound. And even in the really lower octaves, it'll give me some really cool effects. Now I have this wavetable here, and I'm going to add some oscillation. So again, I'm going to take another LFO, and I will apply that to the motion on this. And instead of going through the whole wavetable, I'm just going to go through a section of it. So now these are the same sound, pitched differently, oscillating through different sections. And now that's starting to get more interesting. One of Vital's superpowers is the application of the stereo LFO. And what that does is it applies essentially the LFO twice, but delayed. So I'm going to add a little bit of stereo to this one. And you can hear it applying it to the different channels, slightly delayed by that stereo amount. And at a lower pitch, you you can hear there's some nice grit that's being applied to this. So I'm actually going to make that stereo application on both of these oscillators, just because it really kind of gives the sound a lot of stereo width and a lot of presence. Okay, so now we have that going on, and another thing I want to do is the envelope is really kind of very basic and abrupt. The envelopes are really nice. There's several points on them, so rather than just a standard 80 SR, each point has a curve to it, and it's really easy to make adjustments to that. And then there's also a hold parameter, which gives you a little bit of time at the top. You can get a little bit more complex shape to your LFOs. So now we've got kind of a nicer attack to it and a nice release. So this kind of gives us a little bit more of the ambience that I'm after with this sound. Okay, so now we've got these wavetables scanning and we've got some nice stereo width to them, but they both still sound fairly static and buzzy. And this is now the other superpower of Vital, and that is in the spectral modifiers. These are all sort of different applications of changing the spectrum of the sound of the original wavetable. And really the best thing to do is kind of go through and just listen to them as you mess around. So I'm going to go ahead and mute this one. And you can just sort of like move this knob to change how it's morphing through this particular algorithm of spectral modification. That's a lot of words, isn't it? All right, so ultimately what I decided on this one was to do a simple low pass. This is a spectral low pass, so it's very precise. It doesn't really have like the sort of traditional color that you get from analog emulation style filters. Those can come in later when you want to add that type of sound. So this is really just, again, just modifying the spectrum. And so now I really kind of cut out a lot of those high frequencies on that particular one. And on this oscillator, again, after running through a bunch of different options, I again decided on the low pass because it really kind of gave the character that I wanted out of this wavetable. Now, this is where things kind of get interesting. You can actually add a second processor to the spectrum. These are the types of operations I really want to put at my fingertips. These are very interesting to me. So all of your MPE and keyboard modifiers are going to be coming from over in this area. We have the pressure modifier, so that I'm going to apply to these two modifiers of the spectrum. And you can see it automatically applies a range to it that corresponds really to where the knob is and then takes you to the full range. And those two are a little bit, maybe a little bit much. In this case, I want to subtract a little bit of this one. And really, this is really done by ear, so you can just really mess around with these and then decide how much you want to apply. And it's really very easy just because of this simple sort of drag and drop patching algorithm. And if you're not sure where something is, you can always just click on it here. The other thing you can do is go to the matrix view, and this will give you the same information just shown in actually kind of like a very similar way to the way Serum does it. And I can apply the amount of aftertouch. So that might be a little bit easier for some people versus these little pie charts. And then the slide parameter, I also want to bring that in. And I'm going to apply that to these two spectral modifiers. So it seems maybe a little bit odd to apply pressure and slide to these same things, but it really kind of creates this interesting dynamic where things are maybe not so logical as far as your motions and gestures, but they are sonically pleasing. So when you start to play around in your chords, and this is where the sort of tweaking these amounts really comes in nice. And you can do that from here, or you can do that from here, and again, you can do it from the matrix view. Finally, I wanted to bring in a third oscillator. I'm actually going to use the sample of the French horn again, but I've cropped it a little bit, so it gives me a nicer region. And here we can take a look at what the sampler can do. It's very basic. It just plays the sample and then gives you the ability to loop it, listen to keyboard note changes. You can do crossfading and palindrome. So I'm just actually going to turn all of these on. And that adds this kind of nice warbly sound that is more respectful of that original brass that I had. And I'm just going to kind of leave that mostly as it is. So from this really basic sound, we've already created something that's really rich, expansive, and almost is kind of an experience on its own. There's a couple other things that I kind of wanted to go over here. You can see at the bottom here, there's some routing options. It says filter 1, filter 2, and effects. So this determines where these get directed and how it routes through all of the sort of master applications. So we have the filters down here. And in this case, I'm actually only going to use one of them. And there's several different filter types. And there's, kind of analog emulations and things that have a little bit more grit to them. They all have their unique sound, and you kind of just need to go through and try them out. So in this case, I'm only going to apply the filter to the sampler. The sounds have kind of have this slightly vocal appeal to them. I wanted to accentuate that by using a formant filter and just sort of pull out sort of vocal vowel formants from the French horn sound. There's actually a couple different vowels you can work with. And you can start to hear how that has that sort of like throaty sound to it. And so then there's some controls for that. Now this, I actually wanted to set it at a particular area, for a particular frequency, and then use the mix parameter to mix that in and out. And I have that set up with an LFO. LFO 4, I actually created a step type. And you can go ahead and when you want to modify these things, you can select a preset, and then you can modify these as you want. There's curves and all sorts of strange things you can do to them. You can also use the paint feature. So if you turn the paint on, you can quickly paint in an LFO according to your subdivisions of time. And then how you want those different subdivisions to look, you can make them steps and change the rate of those. So this is something that I applied to, in the final patch, I applied that to the formant of this one here. So go ahead and drag LFO 4 to this, and I'm going to add another formant filter on this. And this is ultimately comes mapped to the macro, because we can smooth that jitter out or make it really abrupt. You'll notice that now that I've added and used this LFO 4, it added another LFO here. So really you have several LFOs. I think the maximum is 6 LFOs, but it doesn't give you more than you really need at the outset. And so this one I actually applied to the mix, and this actually has a nice pulsing effect to that sample of the French horn. So this is kind of an example of how you can just like take these simple sounds and build up all these complex modulations and get something that really veers radically away from that original buzz sound that we had. The final thing I want to go through is the effects and macros. It has chorus, compressor, delay, distortion, etc. And the cool thing is you can actually, again, it's very flexible in its routing. You can just drag and drop these things to the order that you want them to appear. If you want distortion before your compressor, you can put those things before. If you want to have an EQ at the very end, you can slide that around. If you want your delay and your reverb to be in different orders, you can do all of that. And ultimately what I did in my effects section is I added a compressor, just kind of give everything a little bit more even tone. In this case, there's a, by default, it's a multi-band compressor, so you can already hear how that just kind of riched up that sound. The compression really has a very dramatic effect on these wavetables. It's almost, because it's multi-band, it's almost like an EQ in ways that you can bring out your mid and low and high ranges by compressing them individually. There are several details in this compressor. You can set a threshold, you can set a slope, and all of this is visualized. You can see like there's sort of a grid here. You can change your threshold and your ratio. That will affect the compression of each band. You can, of course, adjust some of this with the amounts on each band too. If you're not really satisfied with how things are turning out in your voice section, go to the effects section, just drop in the compressor, and you can really quite dramatically change how things are happening. I can use the macros then to, like any other modulator, apply them to different parts of the effects chain. And now when I control this macro, I actually want to go ahead and change these amounts here. I will put this down at the bottom and have the macro increase it to a certain amount. When you're mapping this, it's really kind of a nice visualization when you modify this piece here. You can see how it's giving you the maximum indication on the rim of that mix knob. So when I move the macro knob, that's going to take me to those maximums. So that is how you build up a preset, by modifying the wavetables, adding modulations, adding effects, and then of course adding macros. You can of course save your preset, and you're going to do that in your little menu up here, and save the preset, and you can give yourself credit, name it whatever. This is going to be called practice, and give it a style, which is good because the browser allows you to pull things out by the style, and any comments that you want to add that maybe remind you of what the preset's about. Then I can go ahead and save that. Now, if I want to distribute these things, so say let's say I have several presets that I've made, and I want to share these with the community, it makes it really easy to do this as a pack. So I can export an individual preset, or I can export a bank. And when you export a bank, you simply go through and select all of the presets that you've already made. So I have a few presets in here. I can go ahead and select the plus sign, give it a name, bank example, export the bank, and what that does is it compiles all of your wavetables, all of your samples, all of your bank preset information, and puts it in a single file, in a vital bank file. Now that's very easy. You can save a number of presets in a bank and then share that bank with the community at large. There's a lot of really wonderful controls in Vital, and you can get some really rich sounds going. Here's my final preset. We can take a look at the effects chain here that I made. And as we go through, we can see that there's color-coded here how my effects are mapped, my macros are mapped to my different effects. I have the filter that filters everything out a little bit as I desire, and that's again controlled by a macro here on the filter, and that takes it down to a really ambient. And then the compressor, distortion, delay, and reverb. Even though it's all digital, you can still get this really nice mix of digital and sort of analog warmth out of it. So that's the tour of Vital Synthesizer. It's very deep. Hopefully you are now a little bit more comfortable with all the different areas and how to manipulate your modulations and your effects and get sounds that you really want to explore and use in your music. Additionally, it's really easy to add MPE controls to your sound and really start to make things that are very tangible and very easy to interact with. If you found this tutorial helpful, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We've got lots more tutorials on the way for a lot of different synthesizers, and we've got a ton of content on our channel already. Hopefully, we'll be seeing you again soon.